In the early 1990s, two graduate students at Stanford University built a simple list of their favorite websites. Neither of them imagined that list would grow into one of the most recognized names on the early internet, or that the same company would later become a textbook example of how a giant can be outrun by companies it once had the chance to buy for pocket change. The company was Yahoo. Its founders were Jerry Yang and David Filo, two electrical engineering students who started organizing web links in a project they first called Jerry and David's Guide to the World Wide Web. In April of 1994, they renamed it Yahoo, and by March of 1995, the project had become an actual company. Just over a year later, in April of 1996, Yahoo went public, raising roughly $33.8 million in its initial offering. Investors were thrilled. The stock nearly doubled on its first day of trading. Yahoo's core idea was simple and, at the time, extremely powerful. Instead of forcing people to know exactly what website they wanted, Yahoo organized the internet into neat categories. Like a digital Yellow Pages, that directory model made Yahoo one of the very first places millions of people went when they opened a web browser. Through the rest of the 1990s, Yahoo expanded aggressively, adding email, news, finance pages, and chat rooms, transforming from a simple directory into what the industry called a portal. A single home page meant to be the starting point for a user's entire online life. Fueled by soaring stock and cheap capital during the dot-com boom, Yahoo went on an acquisition spree in the final years of the 1990s. In 1999 alone, it bought the free web hosting community GeoCities for roughly $3.6 billion in stock, and the online media company Broadcast.com, co-founded by Mark Cuban, for close to $5.7 billion, also paid mostly in Yahoo stock. At the time, both deals were celebrated as visionary bets on the future of online communities and streaming media. In hindsight, both properties struggled to justify their purchase prices once the dot-com bubble deflated, and Yahoo eventually shut GeoCities down entirely in the 2000s, a quiet symbol of how inflated the era's valuations had become. By the year 2000, Yahoo stock had climbed to more than $118 a share, and the company was one of the most valuable brands to come out of the dot-com boom. But that same booming optimism hit a costly blind spot. In 1998, two other Stanford students, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, reportedly offered to sell their search engine project to Yahoo for around $1 million. Yahoo passed. The two students kept building instead, and their project became Google, a company that would go on to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars and would eventually eat directly into the search traffic that had once made Yahoo the internet's front door. It was not the last time Yahoo would be offered a defining deal and walk away. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, Yahoo stock collapsed from its peak of over $118 to about $8 a share, wiping out the vast majority of its market value in a single year. Unlike many dot-com companies, Yahoo survived the crash, in part because its advertising-driven portal business had real revenue behind it. Under new leadership, former Warner Bros. Executive Terry Semel, who became CEO in 2001, Yahoo rebuilt itself as a media and advertising company, buying up smaller businesses in search, video, and photo sharing, including the photo-sharing site Flickr and the blog search engine that later fed into other products. For a few years, this strategy seemed to work, and Yahoo's stock climbed back into the 30s, but underneath the recovery, a structural problem was growing. Google's search technology was simply better, and its advertising system generated far more revenue per search than Yahoo's page-based portal model. Yahoo tried outsourcing some of its own search advertising to Google in an early deal, a move that briefly helped its finances but also handed its biggest future rival valuable insight into search advertising economics. To reduce that dependence, Yahoo spent roughly $1.63 billion in 2003 to acquire Overture Services, a paid search advertising company, hoping to build an in-house rival to Google's advertising engine. The technology never closed the performance gap, and by the mid-2000s, Google had become the dominant name in search, while Yahoo increasingly looked like a company trying to be everything to everyone: a search engine, a media company, a mail provider, and an advertising network, without truly leading in any single one of those categories. Not every big bet from this period turned out badly. In 2005, Yahoo invested roughly $1 billion for about 40% of the Chinese e-commerce company Alibaba, a stake that would later grow into one of the most valuable holdings of its kind in the industry. As Alibaba expanded into a global commerce giant, that single investment would eventually be worth many times what Yahoo paid for its entire core business, a detail that later made critics ask an uncomfortable question. If Yahoo's investment arm could spot a generational winner like Alibaba, why did its leadership in Silicon Valley keep missing similarly obvious opportunities and threats closer to home? Then, in February of 2008, Yahoo received the offer that would define its reputation for the next decade. Microsoft, hoping to build a stronger challenger to Google, proposed to buy Yahoo outright for approximately $44.6 billion, a price that valued Yahoo's shares well above where they were trading at the time. Under CEO Jerry Yang, who had returned to lead the company he co-founded, Yahoo's board rejected the offer, arguing publicly that it undervalued the company's long-term prospects. Microsoft raised its bid slightly, but the two sides could not reach an agreement, and Microsoft eventually walked away. The decision drew sharp criticism from shareholders and industry analysts, who argued that Yahoo's board had let a historic premium slip away in exchange for a highly uncertain future. Lawsuits followed, and Yang faced sustained pressure over the rejection. Within a year, as the broader financial crisis of 2008 hit markets worldwide, Yahoo's stock price fell well below what Microsoft had originally offered, a gap that would never again close in Yahoo's favor. Jerry Yang stepped down as CEO in 2009, and Carol Bartz, a veteran technology executive, was brought in to right the ship. Bartz cut costs and tried to simplify Yahoo's sprawling collection of products, but she struggled to define a clear strategic direction, and her relationship with the board grew increasingly strained. In September of 2011, Yahoo's board fired Bartz, reportedly informing her of the decision over a phone call, rather than in person, a moment that became widely discussed as a symbol of the company's turbulent internal culture. An interim executive briefly took over before the board hired Scott Thompson, a former PayPal president, as the next chief executive in January of 2012. Thompson's tenure lasted only a few months. A shareholder investigation revealed that Thompson's official biography claimed he held a bachelor's degree in computer science, when in fact his degree was in accounting. The discrepancy, which he attributed to an error rather than deliberate misrepresentation, nonetheless triggered a public controversy about his credibility as a technology company leader. Facing pressure from investors and the board, Thompson resigned in May of 2012, becoming Yahoo's fourth chief executive in roughly 5 years, a pace of turnover that made it increasingly difficult for the company to execute any single, long-term strategy. In July of 2012, Yahoo's board turned to Marissa Mayer, a well-known Google executive, hoping her product background and high public profile could revive the company's fortunes and its culture. Mayer brought new energy, redesigned Yahoo's mail and homepage, and pushed the company toward mobile products. In May of 2013, she led Yahoo's acquisition of Tumblr, a popular blogging and social platform, for approximately $1.1 billion, calling it a way to bring younger users back to Yahoo. Yet Tumblr never generated advertising revenue anywhere close to what Yahoo had paid for it. And within a few years, the company wrote down a large portion of that investment, a costly reminder that user popularity does not automatically translate into profit. Mayer's broader turnaround also struggled to gain traction. Yahoo's core advertising business kept losing ground to Google and increasingly to Facebook, which was capturing a growing share of digital advertising spending. Despite dozens of smaller acquisitions and public relations efforts, Yahoo's underlying search and display advertising business continued to shrink relative to its rivals throughout Mayer's 5 years in charge. Some of Mayer's internal decisions also drew public criticism, including a policy ending the company's remote work arrangements, which supporters described as necessary for collaboration, and critics called out of step with the flexible culture many technology workers expected by that point. Then came the disclosures that would ultimately define Yahoo's downfall more than any single business decision. In September of 2016, Yahoo announced that a security breach dating back to 2014 had compromised at least 500 million user accounts, exposing names, email addresses, phone numbers, and security question answers. Just months later, in December of 2016, Yahoo disclosed a separate and far larger breach dating back to 2013, one that had ultimately compromised all 3 billion Yahoo accounts in existence, making it the largest data breach in the history of the internet. The scale of the breaches was damaging enough, but investigations later found that Yahoo's own security and legal teams had known about aspects of the 2014 breach, for roughly 2 years before publicly disclosing it, during a period when the company was simultaneously negotiating its sale to Verizon. In an unprecedented enforcement action, the United States Securities and Exchange Commission found that Yahoo had failed to properly disclose the breach to investors in a timely manner and fined the company, by then renamed Altaba, $35 million in a settlement announced in 2018. Separately, Yahoo agreed to pay approximately $117.5 million to settle a class action lawsuit brought by affected users. The breaches directly hit the price Verizon was willing to pay. Verizon had originally agreed, in July of 2016, to buy Yahoo's core internet business for about $4.83 billion. After the breaches became public, Verizon renegotiated the deal, cutting the purchase price by roughly $350 million. The sale finally closed in June of 2017 at approximately $4.48 billion, folding Yahoo's search, mail, and media properties into a new division alongside AOL, which Verizon had acquired 2 years earlier. What remained of the original Yahoo, mainly its stakes in the Chinese company Alibaba and in Yahoo Japan, was renamed Altaba, a financial holding company with no operating internet business of its own. Looking back, Yahoo's fall was not caused by any single mistake, but by a long accumulation of missed turning points. It passed on acquiring Google for around $1 million when the opportunity was available. It rejected a $44.6 billion buyout from Microsoft at a price shareholders would later have been glad to accept. It cycled through 6 chief executives in roughly a decade and a half, each arriving with a new strategy that rarely had time to fully play out before leadership changed again. It spent heavily on acquisitions like Tumblr that failed to generate the returns the company needed, and ultimately, it suffered the largest known data breach in internet history, an event whose delayed disclosure became a landmark case in how regulators now treat cybersecurity failures. Yahoo's story remains one of the clearest cautionary tales in internet history, a company that helped teach an entire generation how to use the web, yet could not translate an enormous early lead into lasting dominance. Every strategic hesitation, every rejected deal, and every leadership change compounded over time, until a business once valued at well over $100 billion sold its core operations for a small fraction of that figure. The lesson many analysts draw from Yahoo is not that any one decision doomed the company, but that indecision itself, repeated often enough, can be just as fatal as an outright mistake.